They say a mother's instinct is a quiet thing, a soft whisper in the back of your mind telling you to check the locks or pull the blanket a little higher over your sleeping child. But they are wrong. For me, instinct isn't a whisper, it is a siren. It is a finely tuned machine, forged in the mud, the heat, and the unforgiving discipline of military service. When you spend years deploying to places where a single second of hesitation means the difference between life and death, your instincts don't just whisper, they scream.
El clima de hoy es absolutamente hermoso.
Excellent. You got the intonation exactly right. Next sentence. Me gustaría pedir un café grande, por favor.
Me gustaría pedir un café grande, por favor.
Perfect. Your phrasing is improving so quickly. Keep up the good work.
Yet, on the morning everything fell apart, I tried to quiet that inner siren. I wanted so desperately to be a normal daughter. I wanted my 8-year-old girl Maya to have normal, loving grandparents. I wanted to believe that the blood running through our veins was enough to guarantee her safety. Are you sure you want to go to Grandma and Grandpa's house, sweetie? I asked, looking into the rearview mirror. Maya smiled, her bright green eyes crinkling at the corners. She was clutching her favorite worn-out teddy bear, Sergeant Fluff, tight against her chest. Yes, Mommy! Grandpa promised we could see the horses, and Grandma said we'd make strawberry jam.
I forced a smile, swallowing the bitter taste of anxiety rising in my throat. My relationship with my parents, Richard and Eleanor, had always been a minefield. They were cold, transactional people who viewed the world through a lens of social status and pristine appearances. When I joined the Army right out of high school, instead of marrying the wealthy country club boy they had picked out for me, they treated it as an unforgivable act of treason. For years, they shut me out. I was the black sheep, the daughter who chose mud and combat boots over pearls and cocktail parties. But then I had Maya. And a few months ago, after my last deployment, Eleanor reached out. Life is too short for old grudges, she had written in a pristine, elegant text message. We want to be a part of our granddaughter's life. I wanted to believe her. Every child deserves grandparents, right? So I agreed to let Maya spend the weekend at their sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in the countryside, while I attended a mandatory final briefing at the base, 2 hours away. I was wearing my full service uniform that morning, crisp, pressed, badges gleaming on my chest, a physical manifestation of the life I had built away from their judgment. When we pulled up the long, winding driveway of their estate, Eleanor was standing on the porch, looking as immaculate as ever. Richard stood beside her, hands in his pockets, looking over the property like a king inspecting his domain. As I stepped out of the car, Eleanor's eyes swept down my uniform. Her lips thinned into a sharp, judgmental line. Still playing soldier, I see, she murmured, her voice dripping with passive-aggressive disdain. You'd think a grown woman would want to dress like a lady. I took a deep breath, consciously relaxing my shoulders. Do it for Maya, I told myself. Keep the peace. It's my job, Mother, I replied calmly, and it's an honor to wear it. Richard didn't even look me in the eye. He just reached down and patted Maya on the head, a gesture that felt entirely performative. Well, let's get the girl inside. The sky looks a bit gray today, and we have a lot of things to prepare for tonight. Tonight was their annual charity gala. The cream of local society would be descending upon their pristine estate. I knew Maya wasn't invited to the main event. Eleanor had made it clear she would be upstairs with a nanny, out of sight. I hadn't liked the sound of that, but I figured as long as Maya was safe and fed, it didn't matter.
I'll be back tomorrow afternoon to pick her up, I said, kneeling down to hug Maya. I squeezed her tight, inhaling her sweet scent of baby shampoo. Mommy loves you. If you need anything, you tell Grandma to call me immediately, okay? I will, Mommy. I love you. Maya beamed, her little hand waving as Richard led her through the grand double doors. As I drove away from the estate, the gray clouds in the sky seemed to thicken, casting long, dark shadows across the road. A heavy weight settled deep into my chest. Every tactical bone in my body was screaming that something was wrong. But I gripped the steering wheel, swallowed my fear, and kept driving toward the base.
What I didn't know that day was that my parents' vanity possessed a cruelty I could never have anticipated. I didn't know that beneath their expensive clothes and polite smiles lay a profound lack of human empathy. And most of all, I didn't know that within 12 hours, the very uniform they despised would become the symbol of their absolute undoing. By late afternoon, the sky had turned an ominous, bruised shade of purple. The weather reports coming across the command center monitors at the base were growing increasingly dire. A severe meteorological system had stalled directly over the county where my parents lived. We were talking about torrential downpours, flash flood warnings, and sustained winds of over 60 miles per hour. A brutal summer supercell. My phone rang at exactly 5:30 p.m. It was an automated emergency alert for Maya's area. Take shelter immediately. Flash flooding imminent. Anxiety, cold and sharp, pierced through my chest. I immediately dialed Eleanor's number. It rang through to voicemail. I tried Richard's phone. Nothing. I tried the landline to the estate. Busy. They're probably just busy getting ready for their gala, I reasoned desperately, trying to suppress the rising panic. They have a massive, secure house. Maya is inside, safe and warm.
With shaking fingers, I pressed play. The screen showed the exterior of my parents' estate, illuminated by a flash of lightning. The camera panned over to the detached, old brick carriage house at the far edge of the property, a building that was partially under construction and completely unheated. And there, huddled under the overhang of the locked door, soaking wet and shivering violently in the freezing rain, was Maya. She was crying, clutching her wet teddy bear, staring terrified into the darkness of the raging storm. Attached to the video was a text. Your mother threw her out because she spilled juice on a guest's dress. They locked her out so she wouldn't ruin the party. The world around me completely stopped. The sound of the rain, the howling wind, the roar of thunder, it all faded into a deafening, white-hot silence. My mind shattered into 1,000 pieces of pure, unadulterated agony, only to instantly reassemble into something terrifyingly sharp. The panic evaporated. In its place came a cold, calculated, military precision. The mother in me was bleeding, but the soldier in me took command. They had thrown an 8-year-old child out into a severe, life-threatening storm. They had locked her out of a multi-million-dollar mansion to protect their social standing, leaving her to face a terrifying flash flood alone in the dark. I slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The truck roared to life, tires spinning through the mud as I tore down the highway. My parents had spent my entire life treating me like I was weak because I chose a path of service. They thought their money, their status, and their walls of privilege made them untouchable. They thought they could break my daughter the same way they had tried to break me. But they had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten what they had trained me to become. I wasn't just a daughter they could dismiss anymore. I was a highly trained tactical operative, and they had just declared war on my child. As I raced through the flooded roads, bypassing police barricades and ignoring the howling winds, I felt a terrifying transformation take place inside me. The tears stopped drying on my cheeks. My hands grew completely steady on the wheel. Hold on, Maya. I whispered into the dark cab of the truck, my voice completely devoid of fear, filled only with an icy, lethal resolve. Mommy is coming, and God help anyone who stands in my way. I didn't use the driveway when I arrived at the estate. I drove my truck straight through the ornate, wrought iron security gates, shattering the locks and tearing up the pristine, manicured lawn. The headlights cut through the torrential downpour, illuminating the grand mansion. Through the massive glass windows, I could see the warmth of the chandeliers, the glittering diamonds, the laughter of wealthy guests holding champagne flutes. They were celebrating while my daughter was drowning in the dark. I threw the truck into park near the old carriage house. Before I even turned off the engine, I was out the door. The wind nearly knocked me off my feet, and the freezing rain blinded me, but my military training kicked into overdrive. I moved with tactical speed, scanning the perimeter. Maya, I screamed over the roar of the thunder. Maya, I ran toward the brick building. The ground around it was already flooded with ankle-deep, rushing water. And there, curled into a tiny ball in the mud beneath the locked doorway, was my little girl. She was pale, her lips blue, shaking so violently she could barely breathe. Mommy, she whimpered, her voice barely a whisper against the storm. I scooped her up into my arms. She was freezing, her clothes soaked through to the bone. Rage, hotter than a furnace, erupted in my chest, but I kept my voice incredibly soft. I've got you, baby. You're safe now. Mommy's here. I carried her back to the truck, wrapped her in my heavy, dry military fleece jacket, turned the heat on high, and locked her safely inside the cab. Stay here, sweetie. Mommy has to go handle something. I turned back toward the main house. I didn't take off my uniform. It was soaked, mud-splattered, but the brass medals on my chest gleamed like armor under the estate's security lights. I walked up the grand stone steps of the mansion. I didn't knock. I kicked the massive double doors open with the full force of my combat boots. The heavy wood slammed against the interior walls, the sound echoing through the grand ballroom like a bomb going off. The music stopped instantly. The laughter died. Hundreds of wealthy, well-dressed elites turned in absolute shock to look at the entrance. There I stood, a mud-stained, rain-drenched military officer, my eyes locking onto Eleanor and Richard, who were standing near the center stage, holding crystal glasses. Eleanor gasped, her face turning pale as she recognized me. Richard stepped forward, his face twisting into an expression of aristocratic outrage. What is the meaning of this? Richard shouted, trying to maintain his authority in front of his peers. How dare you interrupt our event? Look at the mess you're making on the carpets. I didn't say a word. I marched straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. The crowd parted before me like the Red Sea, terrified by the sheer, unyielding intensity of my stride. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my parents. Where's Maya? I asked, my voice dangerously low, vibrating with an intensity that made the guests nearest to us take a step back. Eleanor tried to play it off, offering a tight, fake smile to her guests. Oh, don't be ridiculous, darling. Maya is upstairs, sleeping soundly with the nanny. You're making a scene. Liar, I said, the word cutting through the room like a knife. I pulled out my military-issue phone. I didn't just show them the video. I connected it directly to the massive projection screen behind them, the screen they had been using to display their charity presentations. With a single tap, the video of Maya shivering, crying, and abandoned in the freezing storm played for the entire room to see. The audio of her whimpering in the dark echoed through the high-ceilinged ballroom. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. The guests looked from the screen to Eleanor and Richard in absolute horror. The whispers started instantly, sharp, judgmental, and devastating. You threw an 8-year-old child out into a flash flood because she spilled a drink, I said, my voice echoing clearly so every single person in that room could hear it. You locked her out in the dark to protect your pristine reputation. Now, see here, Richard began, his face turning a deep, angry purple. But I didn't let him finish. I stepped directly into his space, my uniform badges pressing almost against his expensive tuxedo. The sheer aura of military authority I commanded completely swallowed him. He shrank back, his eyes widening in sudden, genuine fear. You thought because I wore a uniform, I was beneath you, I said, staring into his coward's eyes. You thought my service made me weak. But my uniform means I protect the vulnerable. It means I fight monsters. And tonight, It means I am stripping you of everything you care about. At that exact moment, the grand doors opened again. This time, it wasn't just wind and rain. It was the local police department, along with Child Protective Services, whom I had contacted using emergency military channels the moment I received the video. The officers marched straight down the aisle. "Richard and Eleanor Vance?" the leading officer asked. "You are under arrest for felony child endangerment and neglect." Eleanor began to shriek, clutching her pearls as the handcuffs clicked loudly around her manicured wrists. Richard tried to bluster and threaten them with his lawyers, but he was forced down onto his knees on his own expensive carpet, humiliated in front of every single influential person in the city. Their social standing, their precious reputation, their entire world, destroyed in a matter of seconds. As they were dragged out past the whispering, disgusted crowd, Eleanor looked at me, tears of anger and shame streaming down her face. "How could you do this to your own family?" she wailed. I looked at her, completely detached from her pain. "You stopped being my family the second you left my daughter in the dark." I turned my back on them and walked out of the mansion, never looking back. When I got back to my truck, Maya was warm, her cheeks turning pink again as she drank from a thermos of warm water I kept in the back. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with safety and trust. "Are we going home, Mommy?" she asked softly. "Yes, baby," I said, climbing into the driver's seat and pulling her into a gentle hug. "We're going home, and no one is ever going to hurt you again." As I drove away from that crumbling empire of vanity, I realized something profound. True strength doesn't come from a multi-million-dollar home, a high social standing, or the approval of cold-hearted people. True strength is forged in the storms we survive. It is found in the willingness to stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. My parents thought my uniform was a symbol of a life wasted. But that night, it was the shield that saved my daughter, and the sword that brought down a kingdom of cruelty. We left the storm behind us, driving toward a new dawn, finally free, and finally at peace.